What's up, and welcome back to Gabe Miller Music. Today we're going to be checking out the 3.5 update to Arturia's software synth Pigments. This was kind of an excuse for me to do a deep dive into it because I've been putting an emphasis on hardware and therefore kind of sleeping on the software side of stuff. But when Arturia hit me up and said, hey, we're releasing this update, you can check it out if you want to, this was the perfect excuse. So there's not a ton that's new in the 3.5 update, but I will be getting into it. And if you already have Pigments, you can get this update for free. And I just want to go through the stuff that I've discovered in the synth that I love for sound design. So let's start off with the first bit of music that you've heard in the intro, and I'm going to dive into the individual elements, and these kind of deliberately take advantage of the newer features. So first of all, this element is just a lightly modified preset that I selected basically at random. I'm going to get back into the harmonic engine here in a little bit because I did some sound design from scratch that takes better advantage of it. But overall, a pretty nice sound, and a lot of the presets in here are really friggin' good. And the 3.5 update adds, I think, 150 presets. So if they're all this good, then you'll have a bunch of sounds to work with right out of the gate, even if you're not super experienced with sound design. We've also got this, which is a modified preset. And this does give me an opportunity to show you some effects shenanigans because there are a ton of effects in here that are really good. So this is like a mildly modified ARP thing. So I got a mild bit crusher added. And then the multiband compressor. And I've done some stuff with the arpeggiator as well. This thing's super in-depth and I haven't even scratched the surface of it yet. The thing I've been playing around with though is these dice, which remind me a lot of the sequencer and arpeggiator stuff on the Micro Freak, which is great to see expanded on in this form. So in this case, I've turned up the dice level for the octave jumping. So it will kind of randomly jump octaves up and down. It's not super erratic, but enough to keep it interesting as it loops over and over. And I could go way further with this. For instance, let's change the randomness and the velocity. Also, notice the visual feedback. You're going to see this again. A lot of really good visual feedback. Maybe the trig probability. Gate length I'll leave as is, but now, maybe a little bit of slide. So I got to turn this on. Goes to make it a little more interesting. I'm not always a huge fan of super random stuff for actual use in an actual song, but it can come in clutch for idea generation, and in this case for a little background element that's supposed to be kind of plinky, it's perfect. Also notice the ping-ponging delay. We'll come back to that as well. But let's get into something that's a little more tailored for the update that released today. This element's a bit much, but it's fun. And more importantly, it plays with one of the new things that was added, which is using the synth engines as cross-mod sources. So let me turn this off. So this is what I started with. Let me get rid of the filters. So these are both the analog engine. And then if I turn this one on, turn the other one off, that's where all that grit is coming from. So to show you what's going on here and why this is cool, let me turn down the FM amount. Got to remember it's at 0.138. This is what those engines sound like by themselves. But now let me turn up the FM amount. And now there's cross-modding going on between engines 1 and 2, which is really cool. And you can get some pretty wacky sounding stuff out of this. I'm barely scratching the surface. So in this case, I've turned this up an octave. And then with the filters, also note, once again, visual feedback in here. I've got this envelope set up that I've custom drawn controlling these filters. And it goes out of its way to make it very visually apparent exactly what's going on, which is super nice. And I'm also going to take this opportunity to mention, now, this isn't new, but I love it, so I want to show it to you. There are multiple ways to set up modulation, and one way it does it that I really like is you go to a parameter that you want to modulate, hit this little tiny plus button, and it will then show you all of the different modulation sources and how much modulation is already going on, and then you can set it yourself. For instance, I've got this envelope here, and I've gotten rid of the modulation. So let's say I want this envelope here to modulate the filter position. All I have to do is just select function 1 right here, turn it up, or maybe have it go the other way, which is not really doing us any good in this case, but hopefully you get the idea. That's a really nice way to just immediately visually see exactly what is modulating which elements at a glance. And I could just get rid of it just by double clicking it and setting it back to 0. And I could set a bunch of this stuff. And get some really complicated stuff going very, very quickly and easily, which is just lovely. And there are other ways to do it as well, but this is by far my favorite. But to be clear, that's been part of Pigments before this update, although Arturia did tell me that they made a bunch of little UI tweaks and updates to make it more user-friendly. That I cannot point you to anything specific, but that's what I've heard, so I'll pass it along. Also, they added some new distortion stuff. So if I go into my distortion, you've got a bunch of stuff to choose from. I'm using one of the kind of default ones, the soft clipper. Let me turn that off. Adds some lovely grit, and I've also got the filter for the distortion engaged, which goes a long way towards warming up the sound. But let's choose a different one just to test it out. Let me turn up that dry wet and the drive. So you've got a lot of options to work with, which is always awesome. But let's leave that alone for now and move on to our next sound. So another thing that they added are some new comb filters. So these right here are new. Comb filters are a huge friggin' deal in modern sound design, for both modern bass sound design and stuff like this that deliberately messes with phase for some cool effects. So let me turn this off so you can hear what it's doing. And in fact, let me turn all these effects off as well. So you just have this really simple little tone, just with one of the default wavetables and one of the default samples with granular turned on. And by the way, I'm not going to go into granular a lot here. I did a dedicated video on that a while back, which I'll link at the end of this video. But simple tone, little pluck element. Let me turn on the comb filter. Kind of deliberately creates phase issues. And in this case, I'm kind of moving it back and forth with one of these LFOs to get that little warble going on. And that just kind of does that forever, so it catches it wherever it is going to catch it. And that's only one use for the comb filters, and I'll show you another one in a little bit when we get into the bass stuff. And then we've got some effects. I have really been vibing on the pitch delays. That is this one right here. And it's pitch shifted an octave up. So the delay part will play an octave up. So check this out. And it ping pongs. The only thing that would make this even better is if you could also reverse the delays. I couldn't find an option for that. So Arturia, it's on you. That would make this perfect for trippy sounds. So I've got one an octave up, and then in this effects B rack over here, I've also got one an octave down. And that takes that sound to another level. I friggin' love it. And then once again, multiband on here, just to kind of bring out all of those little tiny transients. And you're gonna hear that effect again in this next section. So here's where I did run into one kind of bummer of the software synth. It is CPU heavy, and it will probably start to choke under the load of this gigantic chord progression. But this is a patch that I made completely from scratch that I am very happy with. Hey, my CPU actually did okay. Look at that. All right, so let me get rid of all of the effects. Let's just do it all at once. Go to synth. So there's some fun stuff going on here. First of all, I've got the harmonic engine, which is an additive engine, engaged here, and I just started messing around with settings. Got another little self-designed envelope curve thing here. And I'm also morphing the shape back and forth. I'm still not super well versed on exactly how additive synthesis works. It basically has a bunch of little tones that are all part of the harmonic series that it adds together to create what we perceive as just one note with a bunch of harmonic interest. So I'm kind of manipulating those individual little bits of the timbre of the sound over time. So let me get rid of the filters. So that's pretty sharp. So let's get some filters involved. Some very subtle movement for both the high and low cut filters here. And then I bring in the sample engine. Once again, doing some granular stuff, in this case using the oscillator spectral music box. And I should also mention they've improved the sample selection. So now you can have subfolders, and you can also have just one-click auditions. Nice little quality of life change there. That's enough for a pad on its own. It already sounds great. So when you layer both of these together, and we got the filter movement here. So I'm already pretty happy with the sound, right? It's already going in a really cool direction. Let's take it further with some effects. Without. With. Because I've got two layers of effects going. The first layer is basically the default other than this parametric EQ. And I've got these two peaks that are kind of swapping places, once again being modulated by this function generator thing. And I've got two function generators going here in this case. So this one is the one modulating this parametric EQ, which is fun. And then in effects B, I've got my Juno chorus, which I love. My pitch delay, once again, pitched an octave up, and then my reverb. So let me turn all these off and then activate them one by one. That goes a long way. And now you've got this big, like, fantasy sci-fi soundscape. And it wasn't even that hard to make. So yeah, that was the thing that really sold me on this plugin for like super regular use. If you can do stuff like that just by taking a bit of time to understand the interface, you can go crazy with it if you spend even more time with it. And that's not me trying to sell it. Arturia didn't ask me to make this video or anything like that. I'm just hyped on this, that's all. And then I've also got this slightly different version of that little melody pluck thing. Except instead of a comb filter, I've got this phaser filter scooting back and forth. Changes the character just a little bit. But let's say that you don't want to make nice sounds. Let's say you just want to make some chaos. I've got you covered as well. I know dubstep is not everyone's thing, but hopefully this is at least fun. So to start off, I just dragged in a growl sample that I got from Splice. This is an AU5 growl, so you already know it's a great starting point. It just automatically converted it into a wavetable, which is always lovely, always a really fun starting point. And immediately I started messing with the wavetable position and the phase distortion. You can see it's like waggling the position back and forth just a little bit. And let me show you what the phase distortion is doing, because that's actually doing a lot more heavy lifting than you'd think. That changes the tone quite a bit. And let me get rid of the sample oscillator. That's just adding a little bit of width. It probably doesn't even need to be there. That was a holdover from a different approach I was trying. And I've got the utility engine set up with a sine wave as a sub oscillator, and that is getting sent directly out to the master. So it's not getting processed by any of the effects. So I can introduce all sorts of crazy phasing issues and all that kind of stuff to the effects and leave the sub untouched. Very nice. Always a good feature to have in a synth like this. So then I've got my comb filter. And that's what it does if you crank it. It intentionally adds this metallic messiness that's super prevalent in modern bass music. And if you mess with the frequency, it will actually mess with the perception of the pitch of it too. So you do want to kind of use it with caution, but once again, this is a new addition, and having more options for this comb filter, always appreciated. In this instance, it almost kind of tames it a little bit. And we've got a little phaser movement. And now with that foundation established, we can get into the effects. So once again, I've gone in and gotten one of the distortions, in this case asymmetrical, and I've turned up the drive. And I'm actually modulating the dry wet. I sent it to a macro. Once again, your macros are right here, so all I had to do was press this button, assign it to the macro, easy as that, and then I'm automating it over the course of this mini drop. So you can hear that aggression at the end there, which is fun. And I'm also modulating this filter, so it keeps it from getting too messy. So that's fun. A tiny bit of reverb, size turned all the way down, and just a little bit of air to it, so it's giving a little bit of space. And then multiband compression. Once again, the pitch delay. Can you tell that I like it? You can hear that making a bit more of a mess. And a chorus. For some much needed stereo width. Use this free ducking / filter movement plugin to duck it to the kick and the snare, and we have. And I also have this heavily modified preset for a little background element to just fill out the drop a bit. So what I have done with this is added a chorus and added a stereo pan to bounce it back and forth in your ears. And I'm heavily relying on the filters here. Hear the difference that makes. I guess the phaser's not doing a whole lot, but the comb definitely is. So once again, that comes in clutch. And then this is fun. This is one of my new favorite sound design tricks that I'll probably do a full video on at some point. But the second section, you notice this is all audio, and it's been chopped up a lot. That's because what I did was I got rid of the ducker, and then I added multiple instances of one of my current other favorite plugins, Infiltrator by Devious Machines, which is like a glitch plugin. I loaded up like 3 instances of it and added some presets, tweaked them a bit, and then just created a bunch of chaos. Most of this is unusable. Most of it's just a mess. But you'll notice there are little individual one-shots that I can now harvest and turn into a drop, which is what I did here. I reversed that part. So if I am a little more intentional about taking that chaos, chopping out the good bits, and stringing them together, I can get kind of a nice secondary drop. And if I spent more time on this, I could take this a whole lot farther. And I might do a dedicated video on this eventually. All that being said, that is the second drop. And if you'd like to check out my hands-on experience with an update to another Arturia product, this time their hardware synth, the Microfreak, you can click or tap up over here. Arturia's been on a roll lately. And if you'd like to see my deep dive from a while back into the granular engine on Pigments, you can click or tap up over here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back with a new video in a little bit.